Look at her, wearing the same dress she probably bought at a thrift store 5 years ago. God, I really dodged a bullet, didn't I? The laughter that followed wasn't subtle. It echoed through the ballroom of the Grand Oak Hotel, bouncing off the cheap crystal chandeliers. Sarah stood frozen, clutching her purse, her knuckles turning white. Standing in front of her was Brad Sterling, her ex-husband, the man who had ruined her credit, broken her heart, and left her with nothing. He was holding court, surrounded by their high school classmates, grinning like a predator who had just cornered wounded prey. He thought he had won. He thought Sarah was the broken, destitute woman he left behind. He didn't know that the text message she just sent was to the man parking a custom Aston Martin outside a man who could buy this entire hotel chain without checking his bank balance. This is the story of how a bully got the wake-up call of a lifetime. The invitation sat on the granite island of the kitchen like an unexploded piece of ordnance. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing that was trying just a little too hard to look expensive. Northwood High, class of 2016. A decade of excellence. Sarah Rutherford. Though the invitation was addressed to Sarah Jenkins. Her maiden name stared at it, while the coffee machine hissed in the background. It had been 10 years. 10 years since she walked across the football field in a polyester gown. 8 years since she married Brad Sterling, the small-town golden boy. And 5 years since he left her in a pile of foreclosure notices and credit card debt to run off with the daughter of a local car dealership owner. "You've been staring at that piece of paper for 20 minutes, a deep, calm voice said from the doorway. Sarah jumped slightly, turning to see Daniel leaning against the doorframe. Her husband. He was wearing a faded grey t-shirt that had a small hole near the collar and a pair of gym shorts. His hair was messy from sleep, and he held a mug of tea with the casual grace of a man who never felt the need to prove anything to anyone. To the outside world, Daniel Rutherford was a freelance software consultant who liked hiking and drove a reliable 3-year-old Volvo. To the board members of Aetheris Systems, he was the majority shareholder and founder of the most aggressive cybersecurity firm in Silicon Valley, a man whose net worth was a number most people couldn't visualize. "It's the reunion," Sarah said, sliding the card toward him. "Brad is on the planning committee. His name is right there at the bottom." Daniel picked up the card, reading the names listed under the organizing committee. Brad Sterling, Tiffany Cox, Jason Miller. "Brad." Daniel said the name, tasting like sour milk. "The one who bought a boat on your credit card?" "The very same." Sarah sighed, leaning her head on her hand. "I'm not going. I can't. The last time I saw any of those people, I was crying in the driveway of our foreclosed house while Brad loaded his golf clubs into Tiffany's convertible. That is the image they have of me. The pathetic, abandoned ex-wife." Daniel walked over and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. He smelled like cedar and rain. "You are not pathetic. You are the owner of the most successful contemporary art gallery in the city. You rebuilt your life from scratch. You paid off his debts. You are brilliant, and you are beautiful." "But they don't know that," Sarah whispered. "We live quietly, Daniel. That's how you like it. If I go there, I'm just Sarah Jenkins, the girl who failed. We live quietly because I hate paparazzi, not because I'm ashamed of our success." Daniel corrected her gently. He turned her around, so she had to look him in the eye. "Sarah, you have nothing to hide. If you don't go, you're letting him dictate your narrative. You're letting him think he broke you." Sarah bit her lip. He's going to be unbearable. He's going to flash his watch and talk about his investments and try to make me feel small. Let him try. Daniel's eyes glinted with a mix of amusement and something colder, sharper. I'll be right there with you. You hate these things, she reminded him. Small talk bad appetizers, people pretending to be richer than they are. I do, Daniel admitted, but I hate the idea of that man thinking he won even more. Look, I have that conference call with the Singapore team at 6:00 p.m. on Saturday. The reunion starts at 7:00 p.m. right? Cocktail hour is at 6:30 p.m. Okay, you go ahead. Make an entrance. Stand tall. I'll wrap up the acquisition talks and meet you there by 7:30 p.m. I promise. Sarah looked at the invitation again. She thought about the years she spent eating ramen noodles to pay off the loans Brad took out in her name. She thought about the shame of moving back in with her parents at 24. Then she looked at the man standing in front of her. The man who had helped her heal not with his money, but with his patience and kindness. Okay, Sarah breathed out. I'll go, but I'm wearing the red dress. Daniel grinned. The vintage Valentino. Now that is a power move. If I'm going to face the wolves, Sarah said, her voice steadying, I'm not going to look like a sheep. The Grand Oak Hotel was the nicest venue in their hometown of Oakhaven, which wasn't saying much. It was the kind of place that hosted mid-level corporate retreats and weddings where the chicken was always slightly dry. Sarah pulled her car into the valet line. She wasn't driving the Volvo today. She had taken her own car, a pristine vintage 1968 Mercedes SL convertible. It was a gift from Daniel for her 30th birthday, restored to perfection. However, to the untrained eye of her high school classmates, it might just look like an old car. She stepped out, the red Valentino dress draped over her frame like liquid courage. It was modest, yet striking, with a neckline that showcased her collarbones and a cut that screamed old-world elegance. She wore no jewelry except for a simple pair of pearl earrings and her wedding band. She had decided to leave the 4-carat flawless diamond engagement ring in the safe. She didn't want to flash wealth. She wanted to exude class. The air in the lobby was thick with perfume and the nervous energy of 30-year-olds trying to prove they had figured out life. As she approached the ballroom doors, she saw the check-in table. Sitting there, pasting on name tags, was Jessica Morrow. Jess had been one of the few neutrals in high school, but she had a tendency to gossip. Sarah, Jess squealed, her eyes widening as she took in the dress. Oh my God, you came, I heard. Well, I heard you moved to the city. Hi, Jess. Sarah smiled, taking the name tag. She didn't put it on. Yes, I'm in the city now. That's nice, Jess said, her eyes scanning Sarah for signs of distress. Brad is inside. He's the MC for the night. Tiffany is with him. They just got back from Cabo. Good for them, Sarah said coolly. Are you here alone? Jess asked, looking behind Sarah. My husband is joining me later. He has some work to finish up. Jess's expression shifted to one of pity. Husband working late on a Saturday likely story, her face seemed to say. Probably made up. Well, go on in. The open bar is, well, it's a cash bar, actually. Budget cuts, you know. Sarah walked through the double doors. The gymnasium-turned-ballroom was decorated in black and gold balloons. A DJ was playing a remix of a Chainsmokers song from 2016. Groups of people were huddled together, clutching beers and plastic cups of wine. It didn't take long for the atmosphere to shift. Sarah walked toward the bar, ordering a sparkling water. She felt eyes on her. Whispers rippled through the room. Is that Sarah? She looks thin. I heard she lost everything. Is she wearing a used dress? Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged in from the gutter. The voice was booming, confident and annoying. Sarah stiffened, took a sip of her water, and turned around. Brad Sterling stood there holding a microphone in one hand and a scotch in the other. He had gained weight. His face was puffy, flushed with alcohol, and his hairline was retreating in a losing battle against time. He was wearing a shiny grey suit that looked like it was made of synthetic polymer and a watch the size of a hockey puck. Hanging on his arm was Tiffany Cox. She was blonde, heavily tanned, and wearing a neon pink dress that left very little to the imagination. She looked at Sarah with a sneer that had been perfected in 10th grade biology class. Hello, Brad, Sarah said, her voice level. Tiffany. I didn't think you'd show up, Sarah. Brad laughed, gesturing to the group of guys behind him, his old football buddies Jason and Mike. We were taking bets. I bet $50 you'd be too ashamed to show your face. Why would I be ashamed, Brad? Sarah asked. Oh, come on. Brad stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of cheap cologne and expensive scotch. We all know how it ended. You working double shifts at that diner to pay off the mortgage. I heard you had to sell your grandmother's jewelry just to make rent. That was a lie. Sarah had never sold the jewelry, though she had come close. But Brad was spinning a narrative for his audience. I'm doing just fine, Brad, Sarah said. Fine. You call this fine? Brad gestured at her dress with his drink, splashing a little liquid onto the floor. That's a nice dress, Sarah. What is it? 1990s leftovers. Did you pick that up at the Salvation Army on the way here? It smells like mothballs. Tiffany giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. Babe, don't be mean. Maybe it's the only thing that fits her. She looks like she hasn't eaten a steak in years. I actually prefer vintage, Sarah said, her pulse pounding in her ears, but her face remaining a mask of calm. It's Valentino. Valentino, Brad roared with laughter, turning to the crowd that was forming a circle around them. Did you hear that? She thinks we're stupid. Sarah, you couldn't afford a Valentino keychain, let alone a dress. Who are you trying to fool? We're all friends here, Sarah. Tiffany cooed, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. If you need help, just ask. Brad has been doing so well with his crypto investments. Maybe he can write you a check. For old time's sake. Sarah looked around the circle. She saw pity in some eyes, amusement in others. No one stepped in. They were all watching the high school king kick the girl who was already down. I don't need your money, Brad, Sarah said firmly. Everyone needs money. Sarah, Brad shouted, playing to the back of the room. Especially someone who couldn't even keep a husband. Where is he, by the way? Did you find some poor sucker to drag into your debt? Or are you here alone, hoping to snag a free meal? My husband will be here shortly, Sarah said, checking her phone. No texts yet. It was 7:15 p.m. Sure he will, Brad mocked. Is he imaginary, or is he the waiter? The crowd laughed. It was a harsh, jagged sound. Tell you what, Brad said, pulling a wad of cash from his pocket. He peeled off a $20 bill and threw it at Sarah's feet. Go get yourself a real drink. On me. Consider it alimony. The bill fluttered to the floor, landing on the toe of her red heel. Sarah looked down at the money, then up at Brad. The room went silent. The disrespect was palpable. It was a line crossed. "Pick it up." Brad goaded her, his eyes cold and hard. "You know you need it." Sarah took a deep breath. She didn't bend down. She simply stepped over the bill, moving closer to Brad until she was inches from his face. "You haven't changed a bit, Brad," she said quietly, but in the silence everyone heard her. "You're still the same small man, trying to cast a big shadow." Brad's face turned a darker shade of red. He stepped back, his ego bruised. "You ungrateful little... Is there a problem here?" The voice came from the entrance of the ballroom. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that cut through the noise like a knife through silk. It was a voice used to commanding boardrooms and silencing dissent. Sarah turned. Standing in the doorway, framed by the cheap black and gold balloons, was Daniel. But this wasn't the Daniel in the ripped t-shirt. He was wearing a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo midnight blue, cut to perfection. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe Nautilus that cost more than the entire venue. He didn't look like a freelancer. He looked like he owned the building. And he didn't look happy. The room didn't just go quiet. The air seemed to be sucked out of the Grand Oak ballroom. Daniel Rutherford moved through the crowd, not with the swagger of a high school athlete, but with the fluid, predatory grace of a panther navigating a jungle it owned. As he walked, the crowd parted instinctively. It was a subconscious reaction to power. People stepped back, clutching their plastic cups of warm Chardonnay, their eyes glued to the man in the midnight blue tuxedo. He stopped beside Sarah. He didn't look at Brad. He didn't look at Tiffany. He didn't acknowledge the circle of gawking onlookers. His entire universe narrowed down to the woman in the red dress. "I apologize for the delay," Daniel said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated with an intimacy that made the surrounding guests feel like intruders. He reached out his hand, gently cupping Sarah's elbow, his thumb brushing against the silk of her sleeve. The Singapore team was persistent. "Are you all right?" Sarah looked up at him, the tension in her shoulders unlocking all at once. The smell of cedar and rain that clung to him was a lifeline. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Just catching up." Daniel finally turned his head. His gaze swept over Tiffany, dismissing her instantly as irrelevant, before locking on to Brad Sterling. Brad was standing there with his mouth slightly open, the confident sneer faltering. He was trying to process the visual data. The suit was perfectly tailored, no creases, no strain at the buttons. The shoes were whole-cut Oxfords polished to a mirror shine. And the watch. Brad squinted. He knew watches. He had a Rolex Submariner he bought second-hand. But the timepiece on this man's wrist was understated complex and looked like it cost more than Brad's entire condo. But Brad's ego was a stubborn thing. He puffed out his chest, adjusting the lapels of his shiny grey jacket. "Who's this?" Brad asked, his voice louder than necessary, trying to regain control of the room. "The Uber driver coming to pick you up, Sarah." A few of Brad's cronies. Jason and Mike chuckled nervously, but the sound died quickly. Daniel looked at Brad with an expression of mild curiosity, as if he were examining a particularly noisy insect. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward. He simply held his ground. "I'm her husband," Daniel said. "Daniel Rutherford." "Husband," Tiffany squeaked, eyeing Daniel up and down, with a sudden hungry interest. "Sarah got married 8 years ago," Daniel replied smoothly. His eyes dropped to the floor. He saw the crumpled $20 bill resting near Sarah's foot. He stared at it for a long, uncomfortable moment. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Brad shifted his weight, suddenly conscious of the sweat prickling under his collar. "You dropped something," Daniel said, his eyes coming back up to meet Brad's. "I didn't drop it," Brad said, a defensive grin plastering onto his face. "I gave it to her. She looked like she needed a drink, just helping out an old friend." "I see," Daniel said. He released Sarah's arm and took a slow step toward Brad. The dynamic in the room shifted violently. Brad was 3 inches taller than Daniel and heavier built like the linebacker he used to be. But Daniel projected a density of presence that made him seem like a mountain. Daniel reached into his tuxedo pocket. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a handkerchief, crisp white linen with his initials monogrammed in silver thread. He bent down, picked up the $20 bill, using the handkerchief as if the money itself was contaminated, and held it out to Brad. "Take it," Daniel said softly. "I don't want it." Brad scoffed, though he took a half step back. "It's charity." "My wife," Daniel said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming ice cold, "does not require your charity, and frankly, judging by the fray on your shirt cuffs and the fact that this hotel is running a cash bar, I believe you need this more than she does." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Brad's face turned a violent shade of plum. He snatched the bill from Daniel's hand, crushing it in his fist. "Listen here, buddy," Brad snarled, stepping into Daniel's personal space. "You think you can come in here in a rented tux and talk down to me? I run this town. I'm the top earner at Sterling and Associates. Who are you? Some pencil pusher?" Daniel didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He just smiled, a small, terrifyingly polite smile. "I work in systems," Daniel said vaguely. "Now I believe dinner is being served. Sarah, shall we?" He turned his back on Brad, the ultimate insult, and offered his arm to his wife. Sarah took it, her head held high, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You handled that gently," she whispered as they walked away, leaving a fuming Brad behind them. "The night is young," Daniel murmured, guiding her toward the tables, "and I prefer to play with my food before I eat it." The seating chart had been arranged weeks ago, and of course, Brad had manipulated it. Sarah and Daniel were seated at table 1, the VIP table right in the center of the room. This was supposed to be Brad's power move, forcing Sarah to sit with him, Tiffany, and the other successful alumni, so she could feel excluded. Now the dynamic had inverted. The table was round, covered in a white tablecloth that had seen better days. In the center sat a floral arrangement of carnations that were already beginning to wilt. Brad sat directly across from Daniel, flanked by Tiffany and Jason Miller, who was now a mid-level manager at a logistics firm. Sarah sat next to Daniel, her hand resting on his knee under the table, drawing strength from his calm. The first course arrived, a salad that consisted mostly of iceberg lettuce and a single sad cherry, tomato. Brad, having downed another scotch at the bar, had decided to switch tactics. If he couldn't physically intimidate Daniel, he would financially humiliate him. After all, Brad was a big fish in Oakhaven. He assumed Daniel was just some salaried employee who spent his savings on a nice suit. "So Daniel," Brad said, stabbing a fork into his lettuce, "you said you work in systems. That's cute. Like IT support, fixing printers. Does Sarah pack your lunchbox for you?" Tiffany giggled, sipping her wine through a straw to protect her lipstick. Daniel unfolded his napkin and placed it on his lap. "Something like that. We handle data infrastructure." "Infrastructure," Brad mocked, rolling his eyes at Jason. "Sounds boring. See, I'm in high-stakes sales, real estate and high-end automotive fleets. I move assets, liquidity. That's the name of the game." "Is that so?" Daniel asked politely, taking a sip of the water. He hadn't touched the wine. Yeah. Just last month, I closed a deal on a fleet of rovers for a local construction firm. $40,000 commission. Brad bragged, looking around the table for approval. Jason nodded enthusiastically. That is a very specific number, Daniel said. It's a lot of money, Brad snapped. But I bet you don't know much about that. Sarah always had a thing for the starving artist types. I assumed she'd end up with a painter or a poet. I own an art gallery, Sarah interjected quietly. I'm not starving, Brad. A gallery? Tiffany laughed. Oh, honey, that's adorable. My aunt tried that. She sold knitted pot holders. It's a nice hobby. Sarah tightened her grip on her fork, but Daniel covered her hand with his own. His thumb stroked her knuckles, a silent command to wait. We do all right, Daniel said. But tell me more about your business, Brad. You seem very passionate about your success. Brad took the bait hook, line, and sinker. He leaned back, spreading his arms over the backs of the adjacent chairs. Passionate, I'm a shark, Dan. Can I call you Dan? I'm a shark. I smell blood in the water. Actually, I'm on the verge of the biggest deal of my life. It's going to put me on the map globally, or at least nationally. Oh. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Do tell. I can't give too many details, Brad said, lowering his voice conspiratorially, though he made sure the whole table could hear. NDAS and all that. But let's just say there's a massive tech conglomerate out in Silicon Valley looking to open a satellite data center near the river here. They need a secure fleet of vehicles for their executives and site managers. Armored SUVs, high-speed sedans. The works. Daniel's expression remained perfectly neutral, though a tiny spark of amusement danced in his eyes. A tech conglomerate in Oak Haven. Yeah, they need low taxes and cheap power. I've been working my contacts for months. I have a meeting scheduled next Tuesday with their procurement director. Once I sign that contract, I'm looking at a 7-figure payout. Brad pointed a finger at Daniel. That's the difference between us, Danny boy. You fix computers. I sign contracts with the guys who own the computers. Daniel took a slow sip of water. He set the glass down with a soft clink. And what is the name of this company? Daniel asked. If they are that big, perhaps I've heard of them. Aetheris Systems, Brad said reverently. Biggest cybersecurity firm in the world right now. Their stock just jumped 12% last quarter. Sarah choked on her water. She brought her napkin to her mouth, coughing violently to cover the laugh that was threatening to explode out of her. You okay, babe? Tiffany asked, patting Sarah on the back with fake concern. Swallowed a crouton wrong. I'm fine. Sarah wheezed, her eyes watering. She looked at Daniel. He was perfectly still, his face a mask of polite interest. Aetheris, Daniel repeated, rolling the word around his mouth. Yes, I have heard of them. Heard of them, they're monsters, Brad said. The CEO is some recluse genius. Never gives interviews. But my contact says he's a ruthless operator. That's why they'll like me. Real recognizes real. I'm sure the CEO would be very interested to meet you, Daniel said dryly. He won't meet me, Brad corrected him. I'm meeting the regional director, but eventually, who knows, maybe I'll be on the board. Maybe, Daniel said. Just then a waiter arrived with the main course steaks that looked grey and rubbery. As the waiter placed a plate in front of Daniel, his phone, which was sitting face down on the table, buzzed. It wasn't a normal text vibration. It was a sustained, rhythmic pattern. Daniel glanced at it. Excuse me. I have to take this. At the dinner table, Tiffany scoffed. Rude. Who is it? Your boss checking to see if you finished the TPS reports. Daniel picked up the phone. He didn't look at Tiffany. He looked at Brad. Actually, it's my chief financial officer, Daniel said. Probably calling about an acquisition. Your CFO. Brad laughed loud and hard, slapping the table. You have a CFO? For what, your fantasy football league? Daniel ignored him. He slid his finger across the screen and put the phone to his ear. Yes, Marcus. Daniel said, his voice shifting instantly into a command tone that was sharp enough to cut glass. The table quieted down mostly to eavesdrop. I told you the valuation was too low, Daniel said, staring at the floral centerpiece. Tell the Saudis that if they want the encryption keys, the price is $4 billion, not 3, 4, and I want it in cash equivalents and stock options by Monday morning. The table went dead silent. Brad stopped chewing his steak. Tiffany froze with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. I don't care if they walk, Daniel continued, his voice bored. We don't need their money. We have plenty. Call me back when they agree to the terms. Goodbye. He hung up and placed the phone back on the table face down. He picked up his fork and knife, cutting a piece of the grey steak. He looked up to find the entire table staring at him with wide, bewildered eyes. Sorry about that, Daniel said pleasantly. Work never stops. Now, Brad, you were saying something about a 7-figure payout. That sounds very exciting for you. Brad stared at him. The gears in his head were grinding, trying to reconcile the IT guy image with the conversation he just heard. $4 billion, you're full of it, Brad whispered, his face pale. That was a fake call. You faked that. Why would I do that? Daniel asked. To impress us. Brad shouted, his voice cracking. You think you can come in here and lie about billions of dollars? You're a fraud, Rutherford. A fraud. Am I? Daniel asked. Prove it. Brad challenged, desperation creeping into his voice. If you're so rich, why are you driving? Well, I haven't seen your car, but I bet it's a rental. Why is Sarah wearing a used dress? Vintage, Sarah corrected, again her voice stronger now. She was enjoying this. Whatever. Brad slammed his hand on the table. You're a liar, and I'm going to prove it. I'm going to Google you right now. Brad pulled out his phone with trembling hands. Daniel sighed, a sound of genuine fatigue. Brad, I wouldn't do that if I were you. It will only spoil your dinner. Shut up, Brad muttered, typing furiously. Daniel, Rutherford, Etheris. The color drained from Brad's face. It didn't just fade. It vanished, leaving him looking like a wax figure. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at his phone, then at Daniel, then back at his phone. On the screen was a Forbes article from 3 weeks ago. The Silent Titan, How Daniel Rutherford Built Etheris Systems into a $1 trillion empire. The photo in the article was of Daniel looking exactly as he did now, ringing the opening bell at the NASDAQ. Brad's phone slipped from his sweaty fingers and clattered onto his plate, landing in the mashed potatoes. Daniel smiled, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. So, Daniel said softly, leaning forward, about that fleet contract you wanted to pitch to my company. The silence that had fallen over table 1 was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for courtrooms right after a guilty verdict is read. Brad Sterling sat frozen. A dollop of mashed potatoes slid slowly down the screen of his iPhone, smearing the headline that had just ended his life as he knew it. The Silent Titan. Beside him, Tiffany leaned in her eyes, scanning the text through the potato smear. Her lips parted. The calculation in her eyes was instantaneous. She looked at Brad, sweating red-faced, in a shiny suit that suddenly looked like a costume, and then she looked at Daniel. Daniel, who was calmly cutting another piece of the terrible steak, seemingly unbothered by the fact that he had just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of a high school reunion. "You," Brad croaked, his voice failing him. He cleared his throat, desperate to find the booming baritone he used to bully subordinates. It wasn't there. "You own Ethuris." "Founded it in a garage in Palo Alto," Daniel said without looking up. "Though we have offices in London, Singapore, and I believe we are scouting a location near Oakhaven, as you so eloquently pointed out." Brad felt the room spinning. He didn't just need this contract. He desperately needed it. He was leveraged to the hilt. The boat, the condo, the lease on his car. It was all floating on a sea of credit card debt and loans he had taken out against future commissions. Commissions that depended entirely on him landing the fleet deal with Ethuris Systems. And he had just thrown a crumpled $20 bill at the wife of the CEO. "Mr. Rutherford," Brad stammered, the Daniel and Danny boy vanishing from his vocabulary. I was joking earlier. You know, just old locker room talk. Just guys being guys. I didn't mean any disrespect to Sarah." "Didn't you?" Daniel finally stopped eating. He placed his silverware down precisely parallel on the plate. He turned his gaze on Brad. It wasn't angry. It was clinical. It was the look a scientist gives a bacteria sample before pouring bleach on it. "You humiliated her," Daniel said softly. "You mocked her financial standing. You mocked her appearance. You mocked her marriage. And then you tried to buy her dignity for $20. "It was a misunderstanding," Brad pleaded, looking around the table for support. But Jason Miller was staring at his shoes, and Mike had suddenly found something very interesting on the ceiling. Even Tiffany had shifted her chair slightly away from him. "Let's talk business, Brad," Daniel said, his voice hardening. "Since you are so eager to discuss the fleet contract for our new data center." Yes, absolutely," Brad said, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "I can offer you the best rates in the state. I know the inventory better than anyone. I know," Daniel interrupted. "I had my team run a background check on Sterling and Associates this morning. Standard protocol for potential vendors." Brad went pale again. "It seems," Daniel continued reciting the information from memory, "that your dealership has a history of inflating interest rates for subprime borrowers. There are also the 3 pending lawsuits regarding undisclosed accident damage on certified pre-owned vehicles." That's just competitors trying to steer me," Brad lied, sweat dripping down his temple. "And," Daniel went on, ignoring him, "my procurement director, Ms. Lynn, made a note in her file. Apparently during your preliminary call last week, you referred to her as sweetheart and asked if you could speak to the man in charge." Sarah gasped softly. She knew Brad was a misogynist, but hearing it laid out so plainly was jarring. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "At Ethuris, we have a zero-tolerance policy for disrespect. We don't do business with bullies. We don't do business with frauds. And we certainly don't do business with men who think it's appropriate to shame women they once claimed to love." "Please," Brad whispered, the reality crashing down on him. "I have a mortgage. I need this." "You should have thought about that before you threw money at my wife's feet," Daniel said. Suddenly, Tiffany stood up. The screech of her chair against the floor broke the tension. She grabbed her clutch purse. "Where are you going?" Brad asked, looking up at her with wide, terrified eyes. "I'm calling an Uber," Tiffany said, her voice icy. She looked at Brad with undisguised disgust. "You told me you had this deal in the bag. You told me you were friends with the board. You're a liar, Brad, and you're broke." "Tiff, wait. Don't call me," she snapped. Then she turned to Sarah. Her face softened into a mask of apology. "Sarah, honestly, I always liked you. You know that, right? Brad dragged me into this. We should grab coffee sometime." Sarah looked at the woman who had helped destroy her marriage 5 years ago. She saw the desperation, the shallowness, the sad attempt to pivot toward the nearest source of power. "No, Tiffany," Sarah said, her voice calm and steady. "I don't think we should." Tiffany flushed, turned on her heel, and marched out of the ballroom, the click-clack of her heels marking the end of Brad's social standing. Brad sat alone. The king of Oakhaven was dethroned. He looked small. He looked tired. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had peaked at 18 and spent the rest of his life trying to recreate a glory that never really existed. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time in years, she felt the knot in her chest loosen. She didn't feel fear. She didn't feel anger. She felt pity. "Goodbye, Brad," Sarah said. She stood up. Daniel stood with her, offering his arm. "Shall we?" Daniel asked. "Yes." Sarah smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "Let's go home." Walking out of the ballroom was a very different experience from walking in. When Sarah had arrived, she felt the weight of judgment, the whispers of pity, and the sneers of derision. Now as she walked arm in arm with Daniel toward the double doors, the room parted with a mixture of awe and terror. The DJ had stopped the music. The chatter had died down to a low hum. Every eye was on them, people she hadn't spoken to in 10 years. People who had ignored her when she walked in suddenly waved. "Sarah, great to see you. You look amazing, Sarah. We have to catch up." Sarah didn't stop. She nodded politely, acknowledging them, but giving them nothing. She understood now. Their approval didn't matter. It never had. It was a currency that had no value. They reached the lobby. The air was cooler here, fresh and free of the scent of stale desperation. "You are incredible," Sarah whispered to Daniel as they approached the valet stand. "I just stated facts." Daniel shrugged, though he squeezed her hand. He dug his own grave. I just handed him the shovel. "Mr. Rutherford." They turned. Brad was jogging across the lobby, panting. His tie was undone, his face slick with sweat. He looked frantic. "Please," Brad gasped, stopping a few feet away from them. "Please, just listen. I can change. I can apologize. I'll make a public apology. I'll get up on that stage right now and tell everyone I'm a jerk. Just don't blacklist me. If Aetheris blocks me, no other major firm will touch me. You know how the industry works." Daniel looked at Brad with a weary expression. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about the industry. This is about who you are when you think no one powerful is watching." "I can change," Brad cried. "Sarah, tell him you know me. We were married." Sarah stepped forward. She looked at the man who had once been her entire world, the man she had cried over for months, the man she thought she couldn't live without. "I do know you, Brad," Sarah said softly. "I know you better than anyone. That's why I know you won't change. You define your worth by who you can step on, and I'm done being your stepping stone." "Sarah and Brad," Sarah added, her voice gaining a steely edge. "The red dress, it wasn't from a thrift store. Daniel bought it for me in Milan. But even if it was from a thrift store, I would still have more class in my little finger than you have in your entire body. Because class isn't about what you wear. It's about how you treat people. Brad opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was defeated. The valet jogged up, looking flustered and excited. "Mr. Rutherford, your car is ready, sir. I kept it up front like you asked. I've never seen one of these in real life." A low, guttural rumble echoed off the hotel walls, vibrating in the chests of everyone in the lobby. The valet stepped aside to reveal the car. It wasn't a Volvo. It was an Aston Martin DBS Superleggera, painted a deep metallic xenon grey that looked like liquid shark skin. It sat low and wide, a predator made of carbon fiber and aluminum. The headlights cut through the evening gloom like lasers. It was a machine that screamed power wealth and sophisticated aggression. Brad's jaw dropped. He knew He knew this car cost more than his house. He knew it had a V12 engine that could shatter windows. Daniel tipped the valet $100, 5 times what Brad had thrown at Sarah. "Thank you," Daniel said to the kid. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door for Sarah. She slipped into the hand-stitched leather seat, the scent of new luxury surrounding her. Daniel walked around to the driver's side. He paused for 1 second, looking over the roof of the car at Brad, who was standing alone on the sidewalk, bathed in the harsh yellow light of the hotel awning. "Keep the $20, Brad," Daniel called out. "Put it toward your legal fees. You're going to need it." Daniel slid into the driver's seat and pushed the starter button. The engine roared to life with a ferocious bark that made Brad flinch. With a smooth shift of the gears, the Aston Martin pulled away. They glided down the driveway, the tail lights turning into 2 streaks of red in the darkness, leaving the Grand Oak Hotel the high school reunion, and Brad Sterling far, far behind. Inside the car, the cabin was quiet and warm. Sarah leaned her head back against the headrest and let out a long breath she felt like she had been holding for 10 years. "You okay?" Daniel asked, his hand finding hers over the center console. "I'm better than okay," Sarah said, watching the lights of Oakhaven fade in the side mirror. "I'm free." Daniel smiled, shifting into 3rd gear as they hit the open highway. "Good. Now how about we get some real food? I know a place a few towns over that serves a burger that doesn't taste like shoe leather." "That," Sarah laughed, tears of relief prickling her eyes, "sounds absolutely perfect." The Aston Martin tore through the night, a silver bullet cutting through the darkness of the county roads. The engine's hum was a steady, reassuring presence, drowning out the phantom echoes of mocking laughter and cruel words that had haunted Sarah for so long. Oakhaven was disappearing in the rearview mirror, not just the physical town, but the emotional anchor it had been. For years, Sarah had carried the weight of that place. The shame of her failed marriage, the financial ruin Brad had left her in the feeling that she was somehow lesser because she hadn't followed the traditional path of suburban success. Tonight, that anchor had been severed. "You know," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence. She turned to look at Daniel. The dashboard lights cast a soft glow on his focused profile. "I was terrified of tonight. I thought seeing him would break me again." Daniel glanced at her, his expression softening. And it didn't," she said, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. "Even before you walked in, when he threw that money at me, I didn't feel broken. I felt furious. I felt clarity. I realized he wasn't a monster. He was just a bully. A sad, small bully. That's usually all they are," Daniel said, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. People like Brad operate on fear. They need you to be afraid because it's the only way they feel big. The moment you stop fearing them, they shrink. Sarah looked out the window. The trees were blurring past. You were brutal back there, you know. Was I? Daniel asked innocently. The phone call, the 4 billion comment. The background check. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You destroyed him. I didn't destroy him, Sarah, Daniel corrected gently. I just turned on the lights. Whatever crumbled was already broken. Besides, he paused, a mischievous grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. I was actually on a call with Marcus earlier. The valuation is too low. I just saved the negotiation for the dinner table for dramatic effect. Sarah laughed, a sound that felt light and unburdened. You are impossible. I am protective, he countered. There is a difference. They drove for another 20 minutes until the road widened, leading them toward the city skyline that glittered on the horizon. This was their world now. Not the small-town politics of Oakhaven, but a world of art innovation and limitless possibility. Daniel pulled the car off the highway and into the parking lot of a retro-style diner, the Midnight Star. It was a stark contrast to the Grand Oak Hotel. Neon lights buzzed, and the smell of frying onions and coffee wafted through the air. This isn't the French bistro you usually take me to, Sarah noted, amused. No, Daniel said, turning off the engine. This is where we had our first date. Remember? Sarah looked around. The memories came flooding back. 8 years ago, she had been working 2 jobs, exhausted, wearing a stained apron. Daniel had come in a quiet guy with a laptop, ordering coffee and pie. He hadn't known she was Sarah the failure. He just knew she was Sarah the woman who made him laugh when he spilled sugar on his keyboard. I remember, she whispered. I spilled water on you. You did. Daniel nodded. And you didn't apologize. You just handed me a napkin and told me I needed to hydrate more anyway. They walked inside. The diner was warm and noisy. No one cared about Sarah's Valentino dress or Daniel's tuxedo. They were just 2 people hungry for a late-night meal. They slid into a booth in the back. The vinyl seat was cracked, patched with duct tape. It was perfect. When the waitress came, a tired woman in her 50s named Brenda, she looked at them and smiled. Well, don't you 2 look fancy? Prom night, something like that. Daniel smiled. 2 cheeseburgers, please, and fries, large. And a milkshake, Sarah added. Chocolate. As they waited for their food, Sarah reached across the table and took Daniel's hands. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Not for the car, or the money, or for humiliating Brad, but for seeing me when I was at my lowest, and never making me feel like I was a project to be fixed. You just loved me. Daniel squeezed her hands. Sarah, you were never broken. You were just buried under someone else's debris. I just helped you dig yourself out. You did the rest. You built the gallery. You paid off the debts. You made a name for yourself. I just stood next to you while you did it. We did it, she corrected him. The burgers arrived greasy and glorious. They ate in companionable silence, the pretension of the reunion melting away with every bite. Midway through the meal, Sarah's phone buzzed. She hesitated, then pulled it out. It was a notification from Facebook. The reunion group page. Jessica Morrow posted a photo. It was a blurry picture taken from the hotel lobby window. It showed the back of the Aston Martin peeling away. The caption read, "Okay, so apparently Sarah's husband is Daniel Rutherford, like the Daniel Rutherford, and Brad is crying in the parking lot. #reunion drama. #karma. The comments were already flooding in. No way. Is that an Aston Martin? Brad tried to sell me a lemon last year. Glad someone finally put him in his place. Sarah looks amazing. Good for her. Sarah scrolled through them. A few hours ago, these comments would have terrified her. Now they just seemed distant, irrelevant. She put the phone down face down. "What is it?" Daniel asked. "Nothing," Sarah said. "Just the credits rolling on a bad movie." She looked at her husband. He had ketchup on his chin. He looked tired but happy. "You know what?" Sarah said. "I don't think I need to go to another reunion." "Oh, thank God," Daniel groaned. "Because if I have to eat another piece of that steak, I'm buying the hotel just to fire the chef." Sarah laughed, and this time the laughter wasn't forced. It wasn't defensive. It was the sound of a woman who had faced her past, stared it down, and walked away victorious. The VIP table at the reunion had been a sham. The real VIP table was right here in a roadside diner sharing a $5 milkshake with the only person who truly mattered. "Let's go home, Daniel," Sarah said, wiping her mouth. "I have a gallery opening on Monday, and you have a world to run." "After you," Daniel said, sliding out of the booth. They walked out into the cool night air. The Aston Martin gleamed under the streetlights, a symbol of how far they had come. But as Sarah got into the car, she realized the real symbol wasn't the car. It was the ring on her finger. Not the diamond, but the promise it represented. The promise that no matter how dark the past, the future was, theirs to write. And as the engine roared to life one last time, Sarah Jenkins Sterling was truly gone. In her place sat Sarah Rutherford, stronger, wiser, and finally completely free. And that, my friends, is why you never judge a book by its cover, or a woman by her vintage dress. Brad learned the hard way that true wealth isn't about flashing cash or belittling others. It's about quiet confidence, integrity, and having the right people in your corner. Sarah didn't need Daniel to save her. She had already saved herself by surviving and rebuilding. Daniel just made sure the world knew it. It's a powerful reminder that the best revenge isn't anger, it's success, happiness, and living your life so well that the past just fades away. The king of high school was left in a parking lot with a crumpled $20 bill, while the girl he mocked drove off into a future he could only dream of. Karma, as they say, has no deadline. I hope you enjoyed this story of redemption and sweet justice. If you did, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Have you ever had to deal with a toxic ex or a bully at a reunion? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have some incredible drama coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay kind, stay humble, and always keep your head held high. See you in the next video.